I look like a WWE wrestler. I know it. I'm all oiled up. Look how shiny I am. I've got the wet hair going. Could have put some oil into the hair. Oh gosh, look at that stick. It is time for the week 5, right? Quarterback rankings. I will go over expected ranges will be on the screen. You can find these rankings, these expected ranges, as well as floors and ceilings for players. Find out which player out of your 2 has a higher floor, which one has a better ceiling, dependent on what you need in the week. And you can find this all up on the website, www.theffforge.com. For better or for worse this week, you're going to see me buy into some of the trends that we have seen so far this season at the quarterback position with how I have players ranked. We are already past the 1/4 point of the season for most leagues for the fantasy season, and after week 5 we'll be past the 1/4 point of the regular season of the actual entire NFL. So I'm trying not to go too hard into buying into disappointing starts for players and surprise starts for other players. But in part, due to some of the matchups this week, it's definitely going to appear that way for the quarterback position. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and before we get to the actual rankings, let's check out how I did last week with my DFS buys and my love 'em and my fade 'em pick. I have 1 love 'em, 1 fade 'em for the quarterback position, and I give you a couple of options for the DFS buys. That'll come at the end of the video, so stick around for that. As far as my DFS buys, I went for my not dirt cheap choice. I picked Anthony Richardson at $6,700 on DK. I thought that looked to be a really good pick if you're not trying to spend all of your salary at the quarterback position, and he finished as the quarterback 2 on the week. So that was a good route to go. And down in the bargain bin, I wrote even more so dumpster diving at the lowest price possible on DK. You can get Aiden O'Connell in the best quarterback matchup of the week for 4,000 DK books. Well, among others, he did outscore Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, and Joe Burrow. So he must have had a great week, right? No, he still finished as the quarterback 22, so I doubt that helped to win you any money. As far as my love'ems and my fade'ems go, Jordan Love had 17.6 fantasy points, so he ended up pulling out a decent day. And then for the fade'ems, I gave you Deshaun Watson, and he didn't play, so obviously I freaking nailed that one. Now it's time for my first tier of quarterbacks, and I think it's a small tier this week. We have 7 quarterbacks in this tier. At my QB1, we have Patrick Mahomes going up against Minnesota, and these expected ranges are they're faulty in one sense that they are based upon what the players have done up to this point this season, not their past history. My algorithm has no clue who these players are historically and doesn't know their ceilings, just knows what they've put on paper. And same with the defenses, just knows what they've done, doesn't really care who the opponent was in those matchups. So, that's why we have rankings and we don't only go by projections, because all projections have their own faults, and mine do too. But this week, going up against Minnesota, I don't care what this says for the high expected range for Patrick Mahomes. This is a good matchup, a juicy matchup. As you can see over here, that deep red, the bright red next to him, it also that dictates that this is a good matchup. This is a dictation of the matchup, my player temperature gauge here. So red is hot, which a hot matchup, that's a good thing, and then a cold matchup for a player is a bad thing, and that'd be blue, and all the whites or the close to whites are just kind of going to be right in the middle, your average game matchups. Then we have Josh Allen in his own solid matchup going up against Jacksonville at my QB2, followed by Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson. Let's start off here at QB5 with Anthony Richardson. These top 7 are my must-start guys. There's really no way I'd be sitting them, but if he was not a must-start player, I would probably be putting a fade on Anthony Richardson going up against Tennessee. I am slightly concerned for him this week. A lot of his value and a lot of where he's best at as a quarterback is still going to be what you get from his rushing abilities, and I just think that the strength of that front 7 for Tennessee has a chance to slow that down, limit that upside that he brings. And then the question will be, can Anthony Richardson take advantage of what has been a porous secondary for Tennessee. So I am still optimistic about the matchup. That's why I have him this high. But also, I am concerned that it could be a bit of a dud game for him. Then we have Kirk Cousins and Tua Tagovailoa, and I could say the same for both of these two. I have concerns for them. Kansas City's defense, who Kirk is going up against, has largely been very good and could give Minnesota a tough time on a good day. And then when we look at Tua Tagovailoa, we've already seen this happen this year where he's had some less high upside, more down weeks, where the ground game could be a big factor in this game, could absolutely crush the New York Giants. They just might not need Tua and his weapons as much in this game if the New York Giants can't get anything going, which we know is very much possible. I think that there is a chance that he could just have a mediocre day for that reason, even though they might score a lot. Now, when I look at my floors and my ceilings for these guys, which I have over here, I would see that Kirk Cousins has a pretty bad floor this week going up against Kansas City, and his ceiling is only the ninth highest ceiling out of all the quarterbacks this week in this matchup. Though I think we all know that the real potential in this matchup going up against Kansas City for a ceiling is definitely there for a very, very, a 30-something plus point game is within the realms of possibility this week. Then for Miami, Tua actually has a higher floor than Kirk Cousins going up against the Giants, but his ceiling is at or below average compared to the rest of the field this week. Now let's get on to my second tier, and this is where things are going to get very interesting with my rankings. Going from my QB 8 to my QB 14, we're going to start off talking a little bit about Jordan Love and Justin Fields kicking this tier off right at the top. And if you ask me the question, do I feel comfortable with either of these guys? The answer ultimately is no, not really. Jordan Love has found a way to come through for you each week, though, so I'm having faith that he can come through here in a very good matchup. That's why he is my quarterback 8 this week. I do have faith in it, but how ultimately comfortable am I with it? Well, he's not a must-start for me. Then when you combine what the quarterback landscape is this week, I think that you have to roll with Fields again. And just trust the floor with him that we hope and expect him to have. And even statistically, he still has a good floor in this matchup against Washington. I will make one little note here as far as the floors and the ceilings while we're talking about that. Sam Howell has a higher floor than Justin Fields. Then in at my quarterback 10, we have C.J. Stroud. Slightly good matchup there, if you can tell, going up against Atlanta. And what C.J. Stroud this week is a high floor, low ceiling play in a so-so matchup up against Atlanta. My biggest concern for him this week is simply going to be a limited amount of possession. So I think he has a decent chance of busting this week. If they're not super hyper efficient on the amount of when they get the ball, and if Atlanta is in fact absolutely dominating the line of scrimmage in the rushing attack up against Houston, who has not been great, they are definitely bully worthy. And if Atlanta owns the time of possession war between the two teams, then that keeps Stroud and that offense on the sidelines, and then he has to be hyper-efficient when he does get chances in order to have a good fantasy day. And I'm just not, like I said, it's a so-so matchup against Atlanta, so I do have some concerns about the upside, but he's played really, really well this season. It is also, once again, just a so-so matchup, and so if they can come out early, strike early in this matchup, that'll go a long ways towards putting Atlanta into a position where they can't just simply run the ball all day, every day. Then at my quarterback 11, we do have Sam Howell, and he is going to be my love him. He has the 8th best floor and the 10th best ceiling according to my projections. He is a top-tier streamer this week. If you're desperate for a win and you don't have one of these must-start quarterbacks, I think that he could help you win. And at the very least, there's a pretty good chance that he's not going to help you lose your matchup. He should at least have, a 17.6 type of fantasy day. Then we have Josh Dobbs in at my quarterback 12, and he's another high floor, low ceiling kind of guy going up against Cincinnati. Cincy has not been a great matchup for quarterbacks, but I think that Arizona is going to give him one hell of a game. And hopefully for anyone going out on a limb and playing Josh Dobbs, he'll be a big part of that, if anybody does that. Then my quarterback 13, we have T-Law, and I have 3 notes about him. I have him as my quarterback 18 on the season so far via my EV ratings, which just is a rating system that's it's like fantasy points per week, but it just equalizes out the big games and values consistency a little bit more than average fantasy points per week do. It's a little less subject to massive games, putting guys out of whack with their average fantasy points. Buffalo is allowing the opponent here for Jacksonville 5.4 fantasy points per game by opposing quarterbacks, and they did largely not face a lot of tough competition so far this season. But outside of last week. But last week they played against probably the single most explosive and dangerous offense in the entire league, the Miami Dolphins, and did pretty well against them, holding them down to 20 points in a game where they it's not like the defense didn't have any stress put on them. Buffalo put up quite a few points and gave Miami a lot of opportunities to try and go down and score, and they struggled against this Buffalo defense. On the bright side for Trevor Lawrence, the Buffalo defense did lose Tre'Davious White in last week's game. That's a big blow to them. And they're already overseas, whereas Buffalo is having to travel overseas in this game. So there's a level of comfort and just being used to playing at that time zone, that's going to favor Jacksonville for a potential upset type of scenario, I would say. And then as far as Jared Goff goes in at my quarterback 14, Carolina just has not been a really good quarterback matchup. Teams have been able to run the ball on them fairly well in order to win games and haven't been pressed by that other offense to throw and score a lot of points either. Then for my third tier quarterbacks, I think I have something to say about all these guys. So Matt Stafford in at quarterback 15 going up against Philadelphia. If Cooper Kupp comes back this week, I will probably be moving Stafford up higher this week. My wide receiver rankings, I do have Cooper Kupp ranked, but for now, I don't really know what's going to happen with that. So I'm just going to keep Matt Stafford here for the time being. Philadelphia has been a pretty good matchup for quarterbacks so far this season, and if Matt Stafford didn't have one of the lowest touchdown percentages per throw at 1.8%, then I think that we'd probably be scrambling to get Matt Stafford off of waiver wires by now. I don't expect that number, that 1.8% number, to be the same when all is said and done at the end of this season. I expect that to be something that will increase, especially with the addition of Cooper Kupp. That should help to make that all the better. I do like Matt Stafford to maybe have one of those bigger games this week. And as you can see, it is a slightly good matchup for him. Then Daniel Jones in an even better matchup going up against Miami. And the Giants open up as 9.5-point dogs via the Las Vegas lines, and so the expectation is that they'll have to pass all game long, and that's what essentially is probably propping up this matchup radar. That's something that I do like to look for in matchups. It's not something that always works out, but I do love that kind of situation. Unfortunately, it's incredibly hard to trust Daniel Jones. Still, the projections like his floor, and he has a middling ceiling. He's a YOLO type of player if you really want to take a risk this week. Here's where we're gonna get into some of those matchups that I just really don't like for quarterbacks that we otherwise trust, and that starts off with Brock Purdy. It's a very tough matchup going up against Dallas. The PFF grades for this offensive line for the passing have not been good. Brock Purdy's been able to get that ball out quickly. Guys have been able to get open quickly, and things have looked well. But that offensive line does not pass block very well, and that could be an issue for Brock Purdy. I do think that there is a ceiling in this game that is very much possible, just not necessarily one that I would want to bet on. I mean, not necessarily one I want to play Brock Purdy in. And the last little bit of this puzzle is that San Francisco is at home, and they are favored in this game against Dallas, which just means that they could end up turning to the running game later in the game all the quicker if they do end up winning this matchup, and just maybe trying to mitigate the pass rush of Dallas might just be a game plan in general. Could be another big week for Christian McCaffrey. Moving on to Dak Prescott, San Francisco is one of the three teams that has done better against quarterbacks so far this season in fantasy than the Dallas Cowboys. My projections like his floor better than Brock's floor, but not the ceiling. It's the same as Brock for me here, basically, for these two. I view him in the same light this week, although I may move him up ahead of Brock Purdy just because I like that floor a little more. I low-key also think that this matchup could end up bringing out one of the better games so far in the early portion of the season for these Dallas playmakers, including Dak Prescott. Potentially, if they can get things going up against the San Francisco defense, which is obviously not any kind of guarantee, but there's a chance that this game gets a little bit out of hand, and it's a high-scoring game, and it's 31-27 at the end of the day. Then at quarterback 19, we have Russell Wilson, and as you can see, despite it not being a great matchup going up against the New York Jets, Russell still projects quite well. You can see his little expected range, or just those. I'm pointing at my screen. You can see the expected range here, a little bit higher than a lot of the guys I have him behind, even those numbers and the coloring there. But you can also see it's not a great matchup against the New York Jets, and he is a fatum for me. I'm not buying what the projections are selling for Russell Wilson. Has had a good season for fantasy so far, but it's been a little bit big play dependent, and I think that the New York Jets defense has a good chance of bringing down any of those moon balls that get thrown up there by Russell Wilson. And in that event, it probably is not going to be a good day for Russell Wilson. It's just a vibe that I'm getting for this game. I don't think it's going to be a pretty game for Denver. You got the Jets offense finding life last week against a really good Kansas City defense, and then you have the Jets defense that has been underperforming to some extent so far. Meanwhile, you have this Broncos offense that may be overperforming, at least in terms of like the fantasy results. I think at the end of the day, this could be a week where that all comes to a head, and not for the better for Denver. And that's why he's a fatum for me. Let's move on to my last couple of tiers here, but we only have one player to talk about. So here's the final two tiers. Zach Wilson, Joe Burrow, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill from quarterback 20 to 23. As far as Joe Burrow here, obviously this should stand out very low in my rankings. You can also see probably the single worst projected player. It's not like Arizona is a bad matchup for him, but Joe Burrow has been the single worst fantasy quarterback so far this season. I simply cannot trust Joe Burrow right now. I'm doing my best to be sitting him if I'm a Joe Burrow owner until he shows me something, anything even. Maybe not anything, something. And I want to be clear, this is not I hate Joe Burrow or I think he's a bad quarterback take. It's just Joe Burrow's injured, and I think that's clearly impacting his play. And even before he got re-injured, things didn't look fantastic. He did have probably his best game of the season in week 2 before that injury happened. At the end of that game, week 1 might have been rust, but now, like I said, he's been the worst quarterback in fantasy football so far. In my final tier at quarterback 24, I have Bryce Young, Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Mitch Trubisky, Derek Carr, all poopy matchups down there as well for these guys, and no projections for Mitch Trubisky. He hasn't played. So that's going to bring us to the DFS buys that I have for you this week, starting off with my not dirt cheap option, somebody you're going to be spending a little bit of money on, and at the quarterback position, I don't really normally ever recommend or myself pay up for the top 2-3 quarterbacks. But honestly, I think that if there's ever a week to be doing that, this is the week to do that and to take Patrick Mahomes for $8,200. He's going up against Minnesota. I think we could expect a vintage performance against a very poor secondary in Minnesota. It's too good of a matchup. Just like last week, absolutely loved and thought it was too good of a matchup with Christian McCaffrey. For the bargain bin, I have Zach Wilson as my pick. Look at him right here at my quarterback 20, decent expected range considering what he's done this year. Going up against the Denver Broncos, I'd have given him a love him if I thought anyone would actually have the gonads to play him. Or if I had the gonads to give him a love him. He does have the 14th best floor and the 13th best ceiling according to my projections that I have right over here, which you can also find up on the website, www.theFFWars.com. And it would also be a baller move if someone were to play him in redraft and he went off. So let me know if you end up doing that. But since I'm not exactly going to recommend that you do that, I will recommend taking him for $4,900 on DK. And that is it for the quarterbacks. Look for my wide receivers in the morning, and then my tight ends will come out on Friday, and I'll give you just a little bit of a snippet of my thoughts on the tight ends on the Thursday night matchup in my wide receiver video. Bye-bye.